All right, welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered how the ancient Greeks actually made sense of the universe? I mean, really made sense of it. Today, we're diving into the complete chronological sweep of Greek mythology. We're going to trace the lines of the cosmos from its literal first breath all the way to the fading echoes of ancient temples. We want to see exactly how these incredible stories built the very foundation of Western storytelling and imagination. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stopped to wonder how it all actually began? You know, before the gleaming marble temples, long before Zeus and his thunderbolts, how did a yawning, empty void transform into the richest, most complex web of storytelling in human history? To really understand the gods, we first have to unlearn what we think we know about the origins of the universe.
See, the Greeks didn't view chaos as a state of disorder or confusion, like a messy room or a frantic situation, the way we use the word today. For them, it was literally just a yawning void, a gaping nothingness without form or direction. It wasn't good, it wasn't evil, it just was. And out of this ancient, perfectly neutral silence emerged the very first foundational forces of existence. We got Gaia, the vast earth, Tartarus, the dark abyss beneath, and Eros, the binding force of desire. And keep in mind, this is all happening long before concepts like law or justice even existed.
So, to make sense of this massive web of storytelling, here is our chronological roadmap. We'll start with creation and the Titans, move into the reign of Olympus, witness the age of heroes, face the fall of Troy, map out fate and the underworld, and finally wrap up with the fading of the gods.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, creation and the Titans, the first cosmic rebellions.
This very first era was shaped entirely by raw elemental force. No laws, no civilizations, just undeniable unions and, ultimately, a mother's profound grief. I mean, we see a violently messy succession of power right from the get-go. From chaos came Uranus, the sky. But Uranus feared his own monstrous children so much that he literally shoved them back into Gaia's womb. In terrible agony, Gaia crafted this sickle out of unyielding flint and convinced her youngest son, Kronos, to overthrow his father. And he did. But, as we know, power is a dangerous thing. Paralyzed by a prophecy that his own child would overthrow him, Kronos took things to a horrifying new level and started swallowing his children whole. Absolutely wild. It finally took his wife, Rhea, secretly hiding her youngest child, Zeus, in a cave to break this toxic cycle. Zeus was raised in secret, biding his time, preparing to overthrow Kronos to claim the cosmos.
Which brings us to part two, the reign of Olympus. Order, politics, and power.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the aftermath. After a grueling 10-year war known as the Titanomachy, Zeus and his siblings finally defeated the Titans. But ruling a universe, that requires way more than just brute force. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades actually cast lots to divide the realms fairly among themselves, the sky, the sea, and the underworld. And this highlights a really stark contrast between the old regime and the new one. Think about it. The Titans were these primal elemental forces, raw nature driven by harsh necessity. But the Olympians, they were startlingly human. They were political, they bickered constantly, they got insanely jealous, and they were deeply flawed. But at the same time, they were the rulers of law, intellect, and strategy. So they didn't just represent nature anymore. They represented human nature, just blown up to a massive divine scale. It's so fascinating to look at how the ancient poet Hesiod viewed our own history through these shifting eras. He outlined 5 distinct epochs of man. He says we started out in this peaceful, Eden-like golden age, where mortals essentially live like gods, completely free from toil or suffering. Sounds great, right? But as time went on, humanity steadily declined. We dropped into the arrogant Silver Age, then the brutally violent Bronze Age, before having this brief, brilliant spike with the demigods in the Heroic Age. And then we finally landed in Hesiod's own time, the Iron Age. He described this as a heavy, sorrow-filled era defined by constant labor, greed, and pain. It's a really revealing, somewhat pessimistic perspective on human decline. And that brief spike brings us right to part 3, the Age of Heroes, the mortal realm and demigods. This era was a spectacular, albeit very brief, interlude. It was a time when demigods, beings born of both Olympus and Earth, actually walked among men, bridging the gap between the divine and the mortal. And if you look closely, you start to notice there's a very specific formula to a Greek hero. It almost always goes like this. First, you have a divine bloodline. Second, you face totally impossible trials. And third,
well, almost inevitably, you meet a tragic fate. Think of Heracles, right? As the son of Zeus, he was cursed with madness by a fiercely jealous Hera, which led him to commit unspeakable acts in his grief. And to atone for that, he was forced to complete 12 literally impossible labors. Everything from strangling the Nemean lion to dragging the three-headed dog Cerberus out of the underworld. His whole story goes to show that heroism in Greek myth isn't about being invincible. Not at all. It's defined by mortal endurance. It's about enduring incredible pain and redeeming yourself through just immense, grueling effort.
Let's move on to part 4, the fall of Troy, the climax of myth.
Now, incredibly, this monumental, tragic collision of gods and men wasn't sparked by an invading army or some grand quest for territory. Nope, it was sparked by just 3 little words: to the fairest. Eris, the goddess of discord, wasn't invited to a wedding feast, so she threw a golden apple bearing that inscription right into the middle of the party. I mean, leave it to the petty, dramatic gods to start a literal global war over a piece of fruit. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite immediately all claimed it, so they asked a Trojan prince, Paris, to judge who was the fairest. And Paris chose Aphrodite. Why? Well, simply because she offered him the ultimate bribe, the love of Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in the entire world. So he takes Helen across the sea, shatters these deeply sacred oaths, and ignites a massive, world-altering conflict. What followed was a devastating 10-year stalemate right beneath the massive walls of Troy. Great kings were turned into ghosts over what basically became a bitter war of pure pride and legacy. We saw the intense, frankly petty feud between the Greek king Agamemnon and his greatest warrior, Achilles. We witnessed the utterly tragic downfall of Troy's most noble defender, Hector. This war just dragged on and on for a full decade, completely bleeding both the land and its heroes dry.
And it all ended with that famous warning: beware Greeks bearing gifts. A warning, of course, that was famously ignored by the Trojans. Odysseus, ever the cunning strategist, devised this massive wooden horse. The Trojans, thinking they'd won, actually brought it inside their impenetrable walls as a victory trophy. But that night, Greek soldiers poured right out of its belly and opened the city gates for the returned fleet. Troy literally burned to ash, and the few heroes who actually survived, they faced horrific, decade-long journeys just to get back home. It was the fiery, definitive end of the heroic age. Which brings us to the mechanics of this world in Part 5, Fate and the Underworld, the inescapable rules. You see, underlying all these incredibly powerful gods, the chaos and the endless wars, there was one single force that even the mighty Zeus himself couldn't control: Moira, or Fate. Fate was this unseen, inescapable force woven directly into the bones of the world, literally measured and cut by 3 divine sisters. Mortals would climb treacherous mountains to seek out oracles like the famous Pythia at Delphi, just to hear the whispers of the gods. So the crucial point is, they didn't go there trying to change their fate. They already knew they couldn't do that. They went to understand it. They wanted to face their inevitable doom with open eyes and true dignity. And of course, that fate eventually led absolutely everyone down to the underworld, ruled by Hades and Persephone. Now, we have to clear something up here. The Greek underworld wasn't some place of fiery demonic punishment for the average person. For the vast majority, it was just a neutral, silent realm of forgetfulness. You'd cross the 5 rivers with Charon the ferryman, you'd pass Cerberus the hound, and you'd face final judgment. And after all that, most souls simply drifted as quiet, blank shadows in the plains of Asphodel. Death wasn't some glorious climax to life, it was just a final absolute passage.
And finally, we reach Part 6, the fading of the gods, echoes of Olympus.
Even the gods themselves were not immune to the passage of time. As the ancient world grew restless and these massive human empires began to shift, we see this really melancholic fading of the old order. As the Roman Empire rose to power, they didn't actually destroy the Greek gods. Instead, they adopted and completely rebranded them. But something was lost in translation. The incredibly visceral, passionate gods who literally walked the battlefields of Troy, they suddenly became these distant, highly symbolic, politicized instruments of the Roman state. And soon enough, mystery cults offering personal salvation, new logic-driven philosophies, and eventually Christianity began to sweep across the empire. Ultimately, the old temples were closed by law, the altars went completely cold, and the Olympians simply faded out of religion. But here's the thing, the gods may have lost their physical temples, but they absolutely conquered our imagination.
They survived the Dark Ages hidden away in dusty libraries, they exploded back into vibrant life during the Renaissance through incredible art, and they are still very much alive today in our movies, our comic books, and even our daily language. Honestly, they gave us the fundamental framework to understand things like hubris, love, deep grief, and blinding ambition. They were flawed for sure, but gloriously so. Which leaves me with a question for you to really ponder. As you look around at our highly driven modern world of science and logic, in what ways are these ancient, deeply human echoes still shaping exactly how you understand yourself today? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.